Right guys, so I'm currently in the middle of editing this video and I realised that the beginning portion of this footage is completely MIA. Don't know what happened to it. I'm hoping it turns up, but anyway, I better shoot an intro video for what this is for. Obviously the title kind of explains it, but in editing this, there's kind of a weird, well, there's no lead in. So basically what I'm doing is putting a CT16V, which is the variable geometry VNT turbo that's on the 1KD 3 litre 4-cylinder diesel engine that's in the Hiaces, the Hiluxes, Prados. So pretty much I have spent a lot of time reverse engineering the whole electronics behind the control of it, and I finally figured it out. I've been playing with this for probably a year now. A little bit of help from Ben here and there, and yeah, I finally got everything working, and it's time to fabricate a exhaust manifold, throw the turbo on and get the tune sorted for it, because obviously I've got to do a mapping kind of table for, you know, RPM versus boost or load or whatever I want to do. So yeah, a lot of people boo-hoo the variable geometry turbo. Most of them don't know how to tune them, that's the problem. You know, yes, if you're going for massive power, a gated turbo, you can't really go past, but for something that you want the absolute most low down and also the ability to kind of fine tune where that power comes on to a degree, a variable turbo is the way to go. The Toyota one is electronic and it's super fast, which is why I've opted to use it. There are other pneumatic ones, but to be honest, you don't have as finer and simple control. I mean, it's simple, but it's not, you can't just say I want this exact figure, whatever it is, at this exact point. So yeah, this is what I'm going with. It should work out pretty well, and stay tuned throughout this episode and we'll see how it goes. All right guys, so it's been about probably 24 hours since the last video and I've got a complete manifold, so I'll show you what I've done. It's turned out pretty cool. So actually, I've got to be careful. Actually, by the way, shout out to Tigware. These Kevlar gloves are fucking amazing. Especially when doing alley, when you got kind of high amps, especially when you kind of, when I was doing my long range tank for the Surf, where I was welding a lot of alley, these were friggin' amazing, because just all that ambient heat that comes off the alloy and just the high amperage and everything, they're so good. But yeah, love these gloves. So I've just finished kind of welding out pretty much everything, but it's turned out rather cool. It does look like it is a 3-cylinder, which is also kind of cool. So the reason why I didn't run, there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons why I didn't do a typical 4-into-1 collector was obviously the bolt pattern. So whenever I'm designing stuff, everything has to be well thought out and easy to service. All the bolts, if practical, need to be nice and easy to get to. So obviously doing a tri setup, matching the flange, it kind of leaves all the bolts accessible. Also, the other thing would be the height. So the collector would, I'll look down here. So the collector would probably finish here and then there would be bends on top. So it'd be this really super tall manifold, probably finishing up here. Which I didn't really want. So it's not really a traditional kind of collector setup, but it's actually worked really well. It merges all nice and neatly. And then obviously this also isn't, if I was doing this for a high performance engine, I would not even consider this, but it's just a crappy diesel. It's pretty much agricultural. So I've just put this first cylinder kind of merging into the second. It is a pretty neat merge. It shouldn't affect things too much. Reason being is kind of on the car, you can see number 1 cylinder needs to kind of come out under this bracket and then come up. And then obviously I didn't want another cylinder coming right up in front of the turbo, because that would be, you know, effectively, this cylinder would then have to come up somewhere here, and it would leave me no kind of good room to run a hot side pipe off the compressor housing, and also obviously the inlet pipe, albeit that will be going that way. obviously when you're designing stuff like this, you want to try and design things so that there's good air gaps everywhere. So, I mean, it is very tight, but there are sufficient gaps. So I'm gonna have to come up with something creative for the water feed. Oil in and out should be fine. I'll just make up a flange and probably do it all out of AN fittings, make everything nice and easy to pull down. It's good fun doing kind of tubular manifolds like this. So anyone wondering, this is 40 NB, schedule 40 steam pipe. So it's about a 3.5 mil wall thickness. So I've got tons of this stuff. And the really cool thing is, literally I had this whole box full of bends, and out of the 40 NB stuff, I think this is the last, sorry, I've got 2 90s left. So love it when you don't have to go and buy new stuff. You can just kind of use your surplus shit. So yeah, it worked out really well. Took about, I don't know, 12 hours to make this up, which isn't too bad. My kind of process, I may have touched on, I think the previous video I showed the bracket to mount the turbo, but my kind of process usually, oh, if I can try and, oh, fuck, she's heavy. My kind of usual process for doing a manifold is to get the turbo jigged up in position. So sometimes, depending on how it is, if it's a high mount turbo, for instance, I'll kind of do a bar across the, you know, maybe across the engine bay and kind of hang the turbo and then kind of come up from below. In this case, I've done the bracket to kind of locate at the bottom, and then basically I just get one runner done and connected to that flange, and then if I can get enough kind of tack welds on that, I can take the whole manifold off itself, so it's literally just the rear runner, and then set it up on the bench. Obviously I've marked it out, drilled and tapped holes in this bit of steel SHS, which I think on the other side I've got my Commodore flanges when I did them. So obviously, yeah, that's another main thing. Keep everything tight and bolted down. This flange, I mean, I've just pretty much welded out all these junctions here, and I can't really see the flange warping at all. I will probably have to give it a skim on the mill, or even the linisher might be sufficient. And obviously using thick flanges as well. This is just some plate steel I had lying around, which I made some stuff out of, so seems to be going pretty well. I've just got a couple, actually no, I think I did weld all this out. I've just got to pull the turbo off once it all cools down, and just get into a few spots where I can't get to with the turbo on the way, but yeah, we're pretty golden now. And yeah, another cool thing that I will do in the dump pipe, which you'll probably see, is I'm going to do, I've been wanting to, and I'm going to do now that I'm making a new pipe, a venturi for my catch can crankcase ventilation. So basically the gases going past that will create a venturi, and basically also pull a vacuum on the crankcase, which aids in ring sealing. This is kind of stuff that drag racers and high performance cars usually do, mainly for the ring sealing and also just the cleanliness of having the crankcase gas out the exhaust instead of dropping on the track or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I'm just waffling on now, but yeah, I'll finish welding that up, probably let it cool down overnight obviously, and give that a test fit, which I probably should have done. I kind of did the first one and then just jigged it all up. So fingers crossed it still actually fits. And then, yeah, coat of heat-proof paint, get that back on, and then I can start doing dump pipe, intake pipe, hot side pipe. And yeah, all the wiring for the VNT is already done. So Ben reckons the map that he did for me in the uni chip should actually be sufficient to kind of drive the car around and test. So that will be interesting as well, until we get a chance to throw it on the dyno. Yeah, so I don't know when I'll see you next, but it'll be something cool. All right, so a bit of progress. I've been kind of coming in here a couple of hours each arvo and just chipping away at some stuff, and mainly just so I can get to the point where I can order all my fittings, which are over there. So like oil feed, oil drain, and coolant in and out. And also any little fabrication bits like these short turn kind of cast elbows and stuff. So I'm pretty confident I've got everything I need. I do have a good kind of surplus of AN hose and also fittings over here in this box anyway. So I haven't had to buy that much stuff. So yeah, manifolds on, finished, painted. I don't know if you can see it. It looks friggin' sick sitting there. Turbo's all mounted up. The last thing I did was get this inlet fabbed up. So what I'm gonna do is pull the turbo, everything's just loosely bolted on, just to check fitment and everything. So it's gonna pull the turbo off, and I'll give you guys a run. I'll pull the turbine housing off and I'll show you guys actually how the VNT system works on these, as a lot of you probably aren't aware how it actually works, like the actual mechanical aspect of things. So I'll show you that, and then also I've done a custom, I milled a custom billet coolant flange, so it's a bit of a tight one for coolant, also for oil drain and feed in the bottom, so I'll show you those. They're not quite finished, but I kind of just roughed them up just to test fitment and everything, so we'll have a play with that. And then once I've pretty well got that sorted, anything that I can't really get to with the manifold and turbo on, I'll get done now. So probably the oil feed to the block and also the oil drain to the block. I'll get them sorted, and then we can kind of put the manifold on for good and pretty much get the turbo on for good. One really good thing, which I'm glad, I can actually get the turbo out without taking the manifold off. So the turbo, I'll have to take the inlet off, which is easy, 2 bolts, but I can actually kind of drop the turbo and bring it out through here. So that's good. Anyway, enough jabbering on. I'll pull the turbo off and we'll have a look at the VNT and the other stuff that I've done for that, and then I can start bolting everything back together. Then I'll give you a bit more of an update once I've made some progress. All right, so we'll just pull this turbo down and I'll give you guys a brief kind of overview on how everything works for those of you who don't know quite how a VNT or variable nozzle turbo setup works. So that is obviously the rear turbine housing. We'll go into that, that's got all the workings, but you see that is the turbine exhaust wheel. So obviously your exhaust coming out of the engine spins this, which then spins the shaft. The center kind of core of the turbo is where the bearings for this is the journal bearing, so like just a wet kind of bearing, like what your engine conrods, etc. will be. And then that connects to the impeller. So that does all that spinning. So exhaust gas drives a compressor, which sucks air into here, compresses it out the hot side, or what they call the hot side before the cooler. And yeah, that's how boost and turbos pretty much work. So put this down and we'll give you guys a run through on the turbine housing. So as you can see here, this is the nozzle arrangement, or the variable nozzle arrangement for a VNT turbo. In particular, this is the Toyota 16, or CT16V I should say. So there's a little arm on the exhaust housing, as you can see. So that is usually connected to the motor, so that is what changes the vane positioning, which that then locks into this little slot. Oh, super shiny. Locks into that little slot there. So that can move these vanes. And then if I turn this over, if you look inside where this turbine wheel normally sits, you can see that there are some vanes in there. Hopefully you can see it. And those vanes, they go all the way around. You know, each one of these pivots here is one of the vanes, so full way around. So effectively, for instance, that is fully closed, so that would spool the turbo up very fast. It's effectively like having this tiny little housing as opposed to using the whole thing. And then as you open it up, it effectively makes this housing go from that size to kind of that size. You know, figuratively speaking. There's a lot more science behind it, but that's effectively how it works. So yeah, it will be interesting to see kind of where the vanes will like to be sitting, because there is a little bit of fine tuning to get it to work properly. because you don't want to overspeed the turbo. You kind of need to tune it with fueling as well. So yeah, it'll be a bit of playing around. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. And yeah, this also works as a wastegate and a blow-off valve. So effectively, in a factory setup, like in the 1KD, which this is from, when you let off the accelerator, it will basically open that up and bleed off any exhaust gas to stop the turbo surging. So yeah, anyway, thought I'd show you guys that. Many of you probably haven't seen this before, so I figured while it's off, we'll have a look at that. So I'll put that back together and then I will show you, I guess, what I've done for the oil and water lines. And then I've also pulled the manifold off over there, as you can see. I just want to get everything kind of mocked up off the vehicle, check all the clearances for all the fittings and everything. And yeah. All right, so while we got the turbo on the bench, you can see I've just milled up a bit of a adapter. So because clearances are going to be so tight, this is the coolant inlet and outlet. Normally inlet you'll do on the bottom and outlet on the top. So basically, normally I'll run -6 lines, but I'm just so tight for clearance because this is obviously going to be very close to the manifold. So I've decided to go with a banjo bolt setup and hopefully a double layer one. So that's why I've got this step in this, or if you can see it, that's why I've got a step in the adapter. So yeah, I'm going -4. I mean, it should be still sufficient water flow. But yeah, obviously I can't. So the problem is running a -6 banjo. Actually, I'll grab one and show you. So this is a -6 kind of sized banjo bolt versus a -4. So trying to fit 2 of them and then a -6 fitting as well, it just wasn't going to work. So I've opted to go -4 and use the smallest kind of M10 bolts. So that's that. I'll bolt that to the manifold in a second, check that. And then on the oil side, again, I'm doing a -4 banjo there, and that's again stepped. It is going to be very tight with the oil drain, but I've kind of dug around my AN fitting box, and I was hoping to just do a straight kind of male weld-on flare on here, and then just put a fitting onto that. But my oil filter is I've probably got 70 mil maybe. So by the time I do like a -10 flare and then a 90-degree bend, I guess, it's going to be hitting the oil filter. So I had this, I think it's 1/2 inch NPT elbow left over, so I'll probably cut the threads off, trim the anodizing back, and I'll probably end up welding that onto there at 90 degrees or thereabouts. And then I'll get the flare obviously out of the way of where the oil filter is, and then I can just put a -10 regular kind of hose end on it. So that I'll have to check on the vehicle, but I can get this mounted to the manifold now and pretty much get the coolant lines set up and checked, and then start kind of bolting all this stuff up for good. So I'll check back in shortly once I've got a bit more progress and something else cool to show you. All right, so a bit of an update. The manifold is in for good. It's actually pretty good. I've got good access to pretty much everything down here once the turbo's out. So you can see I've got the oil feed in there, and also that's my support bracket which comes up and holds the turbo. So that needs to be attached after the turbo's in, because I can't get it all in with it all attached, but that's all fine. I've got good access from underneath the car for the feed and also for doing up the drain. So what I've done is I've pulled the factory press fit out that had the barb on it, and you can see I've cut that off, and then I've welded a -10 fitting to that, and then put a bit of retaining compound, popped it back in. And then I'll tell you what, it's pretty tight on the turbo for all the ancillary fittings. So yeah, you can see with the water feed, I've actually had to basically, I machined down, even this one I've machined down a little bit, but it's still hex. or external hex. So this one you can see I've machined all the way down, and then I've actually welded a head from a countersunk cap screw just to get the clearance from because the exhaust manifold runner kind of runs close to that. So yeah, it's all working, it all fits. And then this is the oil feed. So again, just another dash 4 banjo. And then I've welded the elbow onto here, which will then be the oil drain, which will attach to the AN line that's already in the car, which I've done. Yeah, also got EGT probe in as well. And then in terms of coolant plumbing, I've got a couple of dash 4 weld-ons. So I'm just gonna drill a hole in both of these pipes and weld on a dash 4 fitting, and then I've got like a 150 degree AN 200 series fitting. So both of them will just kind of run. One will kind of go across the top of the turbo, the other one will go down and come up from the bottom. Both of which will be wrapped with some fire sleeve. As you can see here, this stuff's great. Anything that's near a heat source, it's a very good idea to have fire sleeve, and also it just looks neat too. Another day down, but pretty much all the shit and annoying kind of hard stuff is done. So I'm pretty much on the home stretch. I'll show you where we're at. So manifold is on for good, turbo is on for good, oil drain is done. Don't know if I can show you. It's very hard, there's so much stuff in here, but basically it comes out the side there, right where the edge of my torch is there. That's a dash 1090. So that kind of comes out and then snakes down around the back of the alternator and then down into the sump. So, you know, for those of you saying, oh, it's, you know, almost flat, look, as long as it has fall, you want to obviously get it out of the turbo as fast as possible, but in this instance, that's all I've got to work with. So if it does become an issue, which I highly doubt it will, I'll address that if we get to that. But yeah, I haven't really had a problem with running oil drain lines, you know, close to flat before. It's still got a fair bit of fall. It kind of comes flat out of the turbo, but as soon as it gets to here, it's got a decent probably 15 to 20 degrees of fall. So that should be working all right. And then I've obviously got my coolant lines set up. So I've just welded some dash 4 weld-ons to the heater hoses. Looks pretty clean. Everything's wrapped in fire sleeve. Yeah. One thing I can say is heat management when doing especially on a turbo car, but you know, any of this stuff, heat management is key. You know, stuff like this, running close to the exhaust. I am using 200 series line, which has got the Teflon inner. I do prefer that stuff. I use it for pretty much everything. You know, that stuff is pretty resilient to heat and most things, but yeah, I mean, it still can get brittle, and still, I've had myself PTFE line crack due to heat. So yeah, heat management is a key. I got the turbo inlet on, which you probably saw earlier anyway. Everything's pretty much mounted up. I've just finished doing the dump pipe. So it does look quite beautiful. It's a shame it's all going to get muddy and dirty, but yeah, pretty much I've got a 2.5 to, well, I got a 2-inch to 3-inch because it's, the reason why I went 2-inch and cut what I needed off was obviously they come in the same kind of overall length. So if I went 2.5-inch to 3-inch, it would have kind of ended up out here. So that's why I've kind of opted for this. So I got a really short kind of, the shortest length possible on this reducer. So 0.2 sensor bung, and yeah, obviously because we've been super tight coming out of the back of the turbo, I've had to do a pie cut 90. It looks pretty fucking sexy. And I've just finished welding in the provision for my catch can Venturi. So what I'll do is I'll just make up a fitting that's M18 by 1.5 with a standard oxygen sensor thread, and I'll put something on there with a proper end for the Venturi effect. So that's there, and if I ever want to disconnect it or whatever, I can at least undo it and cap it with a standard 0.2 sensor bung. It's super neat. I'm very happy with that. So yeah, I can pretty much put that on, and I must say I'm pretty happy with kind of the turbo's location, kind of front to back. don't know whether I fluked it or what, but just enough space for a tight radius 90 with the cast alloy. And then with the use of the pie cuts, as we've said, I can just get it down. And literally, all of this was one take. I put the pie cuts together, tacked it onto this, then kind of put that on the turbo, and then kind of just eyed a piece. So I held a straight piece up first and figured out kind of the distance in angle that I needed to make up. And then I had a kind of offcut with a bit of, I think it was a 90. So I kind of cut off, you know, the angle that I needed. And literally that fit straight in. I didn't even need to cut it to length. So it's always nice when that stuff kind of works out. I am pretty good with my eye. Most of the time, it's the only way you can do it. You can't really measure any of this stuff. Like I could barely get my hands in to even kind of hold this pipe. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked. Pie cuts, they take fucking ages to weld. I mean, if I was making this out of just kind of normal mandrel bends, I'd be done probably 3 hours ago. But I mean, they do look good. I don't personally like them. I prefer mandrels because they're cleaner, they're a nicer bend. And also they're way faster. But yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place. So the only thing left really is kind of hot side pipe. So it'll literally be, I'll probably end up cutting this off here where it's 2.5 inch before it steps back down to 2 inch. And then I'll just kind of do maybe a 45 straight and then a 45 into there, make it look cool. And yeah, probably a couple of bends to come back to airbox normally sits here. That'll have a 3 inch tight radius, which you can see there. A couple of 45s, that'll pretty much come together pretty fast, I reckon. So yeah, and then I'm just gonna make up some caps for the old coolant pipes for the turbo. So another pro tip, don't use those shitty rubber blanking bungs because they will always let you down. They will fail and leave you in a really shit spot spraying coolant everywhere. If not, it's already dumped all your coolant. So what I always do is turn up a little plug on the lathe and just use a bit of hose with the plug in it, hose clamp both of them on, never have a problem. The problem is normally your coolant hoses, they've got, you know, like a wire kind of reinforcement through them. When you get those rubber blanking bungs, they're just pure rubber, and the pressure of the coolant and all the heat and just everything, it's pushing just on rubber. It doesn't have any reinforcement in it or around it to kind of hold the pressure, so eventually they will blow. It's happened to me on my Forester. Thankfully I was only about 10 minutes from the workshop so I could limp the car home. Happened to Brett on his 80 series on our last trip at the beginning of the year. Thankfully it happened at our mate's place. And we could scrounge together enough stuff out of both of our cars and fix that. So yeah, pro tip. All right guys, well, it's running and there's no leaks. Sounds good. So looking pretty good so far. I'm pretty keen to take this for a drive. I've just got a few more little things to button up, but yeah, everything is looking bloody perfect. Hopefully you can hear me okay over the engine. So anyway, I'll just shut it off. So obviously that's the turbo motor, and on the front there's a Hall effect sensor which knows what the position is. Also you'll see I've done a little heat shield here just to protect this silicon from the heat from this runner. It'll probably be fine. Silicon's pretty resilient, but you know, being a vehicle that gets abused a fair bit and does a lot of remote touring, it's the last thing you really want to have. No boost because you got a hole burnt in your silicon elbow. So I forget where we left off last. Actually, I should really go look at footage. Anyway, I just wanted to show you something that I've just kind of whipped up today, which is kind of cool in terms of just kind of getting some data for tuning the VNT or turbo position. So I've got probably a little while before Ben's free to throw it on the dyno. So basically what I've done is just make up a little Arduino setup with a screen, picking up some sensor data out of the ECU, and also I have incorporated a PWM generator that I've connected to the turbo. So I've got a little rotary dial potentiometer that I can change the vane position. So I've just been basically out for the last half an hour or so, driving around in different conditions. I'll try to show you on camera, but you probably won't be able to hear it like in person, but it's quite interesting. You can hear and feel the difference in the engine when you kind of close and open up the turbo. So for instance, at no load idle, just kind of free revving, if you've got the turbo fully closed up, it makes a shitload of boost really fast, but you can audibly hear it kind of choking up, and you can also feel the sluggish kind of accelerator response. Whereas if you then crank it wide open, the throttle response is heaps snappier. The note of the engine changes, the note through the snorkel changes. It's quite interesting. And then, you know, same thing kind of when you're loading it up. So I'm pretty much just getting some data so I can write, I'm gonna write the map that I need, that I think I need based on the data that I've got. And Ben will then put that in the tune for the uni chip, obviously because he's the only one that's licensed to use the software. I can't tune it myself, which is annoying, but basically I'll send in the map, he'll put that into the tune, send the actual tune file back to me, I'll load it on the ECU and test out how it works. And hopefully by the time we hit the dyno, it'll be pretty well dialed in, and I'll have done a lot of the kind of slow, laborious work as best as I can. But yeah, anyway, I'll show you this little Duvalacca. So yeah, as you can see here, let me, basically I've just taken an enclosure and put a screen in it, a bit of Velcro to stick to the dash there. This knob was initially, the idea was to switch between whether the Unichip controls the PWM or whether the this module with this controls it. So unfortunately, going through the switch, it makes the square wave for the PWM pretty lousy. So I don't know what that is. I'll maybe play around with that later, but it's mainly just to get some data in the interim for Ben so that we can actually, well, I can actually drive the car in the meantime before we throw it on the dyno. So you can see I've just got you know, the PWM percentage, throttle position sensor. So I've scaled this in what the Unichip sees. So Unichip sees 1 to 13. So I can write that whatever I want, but obviously to make it easier to translate onto the map, I may as well keep it what the actual map is. And map, I haven't finished configuring the sensor, but that would usually read boost in PSI. But yeah, that's kind of got a floating ground at the moment, so it's reading a bit shit. But the main thing is I just want to see kind of pedal position, how the turbo reacts to the different opening positions. And then obviously I've just been looking at the tack and also the boost. I can mainly hear it. So, so yeah, I've just been kind of going around and just noting some things down. Obviously because it's an old kind of system and I'm kind of piecing together bits and pieces. I haven't got proper data logging set up yet. Ideally, I'd like to kind of take this data and put it into Megalog Viewer or something and look at it like a proper data log, but it's going to take a lot more kind of time to figure everything out and get it all working nicely. So for now, this will do me to get a pretty good map. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Everything's working. I'm pretty stoked, to be honest. So I'm just going to go and write this map for Ben and flash that on, see how it performs, and yeah. It's friggin' amazing. The car, it's totally transformed the car. I don't know if I've already mentioned this or not, but the sound through the snorkel is completely different. Before, the turbo would sound like it'd sound like a scorched cat, like it's screaming its tits off, albeit the thing was over boosted. But everything just sounds different, like the exhaust note, there's no shit kind of exhaust sound coming through the snorkel now, which I think now, after kind of hearing the differences that the turbo makes when you close it up and open it up, it was probably a very small turbo, very inefficient. So it was just cavitating and it just sounded really just bad. And also, one thing I have noticed is the intake temps are substantially less. All right, so I'll give you guys a quick kind of demo of what I'm talking about. So at the moment, the turbo is completely closed. You can probably hear it spooling up. I'm doing about 2000 RPM. You can hear that. And then I'll kind of open it up a bit. So that's it now, 50% duty cycle. And then I open it up to say 60%, and the note of the engine changes. Then I go to say 70%. There's obviously no boost, but when I kind of free rev it like that, it feels like it can breathe really well. Whereas if I close it back up, say let's just go to 40, you can kind of hear the engine note change. It sounds a bit more choked. It doesn't free rev as smoothly, and it's just an audible kind of difference in the engine note. I don't know if you can hear it, but yeah, it's quite interesting. And you can really kind of hear it more so on the street when it's under load, and there's kind of more fuel, so it's making more power, more boost, more exhaust gas. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. Not many people kind of go into this, especially tuners tuning these in factory vehicles. So yeah, just something to play around with, something cool. And as I said, the advantage over using a pneumatic VNT is obviously you've got this amount of adjustment. There are kind of controllers you can get for them, but nothing's going to give you as much control as, you know, this here. So yeah, let me just push that to the side. I've got a bit of an update from the future. So it's been probably a year and a half maybe, I can't even remember, since I shot this video. And yes, it's showing the age of this video. Sorry, I've only just got around to editing it, but it's probably good because I've got some more things that I've learned and also some things that have happened that I've fixed and whatever. So I think from memory this has probably changed. I mean, this isn't really to do with anything, but I have actually ended up fitting the factory airbox back in just to quieten down the induction noise, because it was just putridly loud with the inline pod filter. But the main thing that you keen-eyed viewers might be looking at is this random coil of copper here. So for those of you who have a bit of an idea, I know you already know what this is, but for those of you who don't, this is called a EMAP sensor. So exhaust manifold absolute pressure. So it's, yeah, finding the pressure of the exhaust manifold, which is quite crucial when tuning a variable geometry turbo. Also crucial for just selecting turbo size and just kind of seeing how everything's working in the exhaust side, which ends up translating to the whole kind of engine anyway. But yeah, basically there's just a AN fitting on the exhaust manifold there, as close to the kind of collector as possible. Same with the EGT probe. So that then goes through the copper tube, which cools down the exhaust gas. And then that runs into, well, I've actually added a section of 200 series AN line in this heat sleeve here, because what was happening was the exhaust pulses, because it was all hardline, was actually transferring into the body of the vehicle, and it was, you could hear it. It was weird. So anyway, I put a bit of AN line in there, which kind of separated that, so that took that away. So basically this billet canister here is a damper, so there's pretty much just some steel wool in that, which dampens the exhaust pulses, and then it's just a standard pressure sensor. So yeah, I'm just using the fuel pressure input for my JRP multi-gauge. So essentially if you come in here, so as you can see, I'm using the fuel pressure here to show the pressure in the exhaust manifold. So I can directly compare that with the boost pressure. So I'll kind of run into why I've done this in a sec. But basically I want to keep this pressure within, you know, I don't want it to be any more than double. Ideally the engine's pretty happy with like 1.5 to 1. So depends on the RPM and all that kind of stuff, but that's to keep an eye on back pressure, which can kind of indicate overspeed of turbo, and also, you know, that can result in damage. So yeah, basically the reason why that EMAP sensor is now in the car, ideally I would have put that in when I first set this up, but I kind of, mixing and matching between all different things around the car, and I just kind of didn't end up doing it, and everything was working well. So I ended up killing the previous turbo, which appears to be due to overspeed. I'll throw some photos on the screen. Basically the compressor housing impeller pretty much just blew the blades off by the looks of all the tips of the blades. Thankfully they all kind of went out the inlet and they got caught in the filter. I did actually take everything off and check. There were a couple in the intercooler as well. But yeah, it turns out from Ben's analysis, it looked like a classic symptom of overspeed. So that's kind of the risk with a variable geometry turbo, is if you close it up too much and make it work too hard, you can obviously overspeed it and cause catastrophic failure. So that's pretty much what happened. Thankfully, I wasn't far from home and I managed to, because I've got my little controller thing that I made, which you probably saw previously in the video, I managed to just plug that in and override the ECU, just opened the turbo right up and managed to get it home basically NA. This shaft was bent, or there was something wrong because it was actually spewing a fair bit of oil out. So I got lucky on that one, but it made me realize that I really need to have an EMAP sensor, which is why I've gone and installed it. So I've now got a high flow turbo from Hiace. Very high quality turbo. Hiace do some awesome stuff. A lot of you guys have probably seen them. Absolute legend of a dude as well. So yeah, I've got the Hiace high flow, I guess stage 2 CT16V turbo on it now. And yeah, the car's been going great. The highest EMAP I think I see is probably 2 to 1 as I'm kind of taking off, trying to, going from 0 boost up to whatever. Once the turbo is kind of in its efficiency range, the max kind of EMAP I'd be seeing is maybe 1.7 to 1. It usually sits around 1.5 to 1, which is pretty much smack bang where you want it. And you can feel and hear the engine likes it. So yeah, I like to obviously try and report on my tribulations as well as successes. So unfortunately I killed a turbo in the kind of process of figuring this all out, but I know now that, yeah, I need to keep a closer eye on that. And where the map is at now for the VNT, it's looking really good. Also with the Hiace turbo, I'll mention that the impeller blade design, I can definitely notice a difference. So if you recall the previous turbo that I had on this, which I initially set it up with, I think that was a 12 or 11 blade impeller wheel. They look really good, but they're not really suited to high flow. Whereas the Hiace and a lot of the other companies who do like a high flow, or even just the generic turbos you buy these days, a lot of the time they've got like I think it's a six blade with a kind of secondary blade not too far behind it. I don't know enough about the science behind all of that impeller and that blade technology, but essentially that gives you more ability to suck more air into the turbo in through the impeller. And I must say it has actually made a difference going from the previous turbo to this turbo. I've had to change a lot of the map. I mean, the shape of it's pretty much the same, but I've had to change some of the values to, I think, close this turbo up a little bit more because it was so free flowing and open with that. I'm guessing because of that impeller design. So yeah, that's where the car's at now. It's been on this turbo for probably 6 months or so. It's been going great. I'm about to go away in a couple of days. I've done a few trips on it. Everything's pretty good. And yeah, still haven't actually had a chance to put on the dyno, but yeah, it's going well enough. And I do actually have a 1KZ to put in it when I get a chance. Probably leaning to do that sooner than later because I'd like to just have that extra bit of torque down low. That's pretty much the only reason why I'm doing it. The 2L is going amazingly, especially for the weight this vehicle's carrying. But yeah, down low, it's a real problem. So Anyways, now the video is actually done. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys got something out of this, and yeah, hopefully there won't be any more updates on this. It's all running well, so fingers crossed.